You feel the stone beneath your bare feet, cold, slick, with something you don't want to name. Above you, the roar is deafening, a sound that seems to come from the earth itself. 50,000 voices, all screaming for blood. Your blood, may be, or someone else's. You can't tell anymore. The iron collar around your neck weighs more than fear itself, and somewhere in the darkness behind you, a woman is praying in a language Rome wants the world to forget. This is 73 AD. The arena floor stretches before you like a mouth, waiting to swallow everything you were, everything you could have been. And the man walking toward you, the one they're all screaming for, he's already decided your fate. Or has he? Before we step into what happened next, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? It's honestly incredible that a story this dark, this buried, somehow finds its way to your screen 2,000 years later. Drop a comment, hit subscribe. Because once you hear what happened in those underground chambers, you'll understand why Rome tried so hard to make sure no one ever would. The records we're about to explore come from 3 sources Rome never intended you to see. The first, Cassius Dio's later writings, the passages his editors tried to soften. The second, excavation reports from beneath the Colosseum published in 2019, documenting rooms that don't appear in any tourist guide. The third, Senate minutes from 79 AD, archived in fragments at the Vatican, debating a law so controversial that half the senators refused to let their votes be recorded. This isn't speculation. This is what Rome did when the crowds went home. This is what victory meant when you had no power and someone else had all of it. The Colosseum itself had been open for barely a year when this story begins. Its inaugural games, still fresh in public memory, 100 days of slaughter designed to announce that Rome had perfected the machinery of dominance. The building could swallow entire armies, and often did. But the true horror wasn't what happened on the sand under the sun. It was what happened below in the hypogeum, the network of corridors and cells where Rome kept its inventory of the conquered. They called them captiva, war prizes, human beings stripped of names, histories, futures reduced to a bureaucratic category, and a bronze tag stamped with a number. Among them, after the Dacian campaigns of 72 to 73 AD, were over 100 women. Nobility, some of them chieftains' daughters, priestesses who'd once led ceremonies under open skies. Now they stood in cells barely wide enough to lie down in, waiting for Rome to decide what entertainment their suffering might provide. The games weren't just spectacle. They were theology, politics, and terror braided into ritual. Every execution carried a message. Every humiliation was calculated. Rome didn't just defeat its enemies, it needed the world to watch those enemies be unmade, piece by piece, until rebellion seemed not just futile, but obscene. And the gladiators, they were both victims and instruments of this machine. Most were slaves, prisoners, men who'd been swallowed by the same empire that now fed them to crowds. They killed to survive, survived to kill again. The best of them became celebrities, their faces on oil lamps, their names chanted by children, their sweat collected and sold as medicine. The worst paradox of Rome: you could be property and famous at the same time, enslaved and worshipped in a single afternoon. Gaius Valerius Maximus had killed 37 men by the summer of 73, AD 37, verified deaths in the arena. Each one documented by a scribe, each one cheered by thousands. He stood nearly 6 feet tall, extraordinary for the time, his body a canvas of violence, every scar a story, every story ending the same way. He'd been born free, the son of a blacksmith, until his father died in debt and the collectors came. Roman law was efficient that way. Can't pay? You become payment. 14 years he'd been fighting. 14 years of waking up wondering if today was the day he'd be dragged out on a meat hook, another nameless body in the pile. His dream was simple: earn the rudies, the wooden sword that meant freedom. His nightmare was dying before that happened, forgotten as quickly as yesterday's sand was swept away. On August 12, 73 A.D., he faced a Dacian champion in front of Emperor Vespasian himself. The fight lasted 11 minutes. The Dacian was skilled, fast, desperate. But Gaius had something the other man didn't: the exhausted acceptance of someone who'd stopped caring whether he lived. That makes you dangerous in a way hope never can. When it ended, when the Dacian's blood mixed with the sand and the crowd shook the stone with their approval, Gaius stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the emperor's judgment. The thumb turned, the crowd roared. Another life taken. Another step toward freedom. But freedom came with a cost. Rome never advertised on its monuments. The reward was standard, codified, repeated hundreds of times: gold, wine, a night in decent quarters. And one other thing: Victoria Carnalis, the carnal privilege, first selection among the female captives. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't even controversial. To Rome, this was logical. The conquered existed to satisfy the conqueror in every possible way. Their bodies, like their land, were simply new territory to claim. The preparation began immediately. In the holding cells beneath the arena, attendants arrived with water, combs, clean tunics. They moved efficiently, clinically inspecting the women like livestock at market. An older woman, a Dacian priestess named Zia, had seen this ritual before. She whispered to the younger ones what was coming, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. They weren't being cleaned for execution. That would have been a mercy. 20 women stood in that corridor. Among them was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 17, named Rhina. Before Rome came, she'd been promised to a warrior from the northern clans. She'd spent her last free morning weaving flowers into her hair for a wedding that would never happen. Her brothers had died defending their village. Her mother had been killed when she tried to stop a Roman soldier from taking Rhina. Now she stood in a tunic that wasn't hers. In a building designed to celebrate her people's destruction, waiting to discover what Rome meant by victory, the doors opened. Gaius walked in, still wearing his arena armor, still covered in someone else's blood. His eyes moved across the line of women. And here's where the records fracture, where history becomes archaeology, where we have to piece together what happened from what people, centuries later, tried very hard not to write down clearly. Cassius Dio mentions it only in passing, his prose suddenly vague, the customs regarding female captives taken after major victories. Seneca, usually graphic in his descriptions of Roman excess, goes silent on this particular practice. Tacitus, who documented everything from incest to assassination, treats this subject like a stone he'd rather not lift. That silence itself is evidence. When Roman historians, men who described crucifixions in detail, who cataloged every form of torture, when they suddenly develop selective amnesia, you know you found something Rome was ashamed of. What we do know comes from 3 sources. First, the rooms themselves excavated beneath the eastern section of the Colosseum. Small chambers, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with iron rings embedded in the walls at specific heights. Drainage channels cut into the stone floors. Scratch marks near the doorways made by fingernails, preserved in limestone. These weren't storage rooms or gladiator quarters. They were too small, too isolated, too deliberately designed for something else. Second, the bronze tags recovered during excavations between 2016 and 2019. 6 of them stamped with Captiva and dates spanning 72 to 79 AD. One was found beneath what would have been a bed frame, another near a drainage grate. The archaeologists' report, published in the Journal of Roman Archaeology, uses careful language. Chambers consistent with intimate encounters of a non-consensual nature. Third, the law itself. In October of 79 AD, the Roman Senate passed the Lex Captiva Dignitas, the law of captive dignity. It didn't free anyone, it didn't punish anyone. What it did was ban the public distribution of female prisoners as rewards in the arena specifically, not private use, not slavery in general, just the theatrical, visible, arena-centered version of it. Why would Rome need such a law if the practice didn't exist? And why would senators argue for 4 hours about something that was merely rumor? Back in that corridor in 73 AD, Gaius made his selection. The records say only that he chose one of the Dacian women. Her name isn't recorded. What happened next is he took her to one of those small rooms. The door closed. Guards stood outside. This was protocol, documented procedure, part of the arena's operational routine. What should have been a straightforward act of exploitation repeated countless times across the empire somehow went wrong. Or right, depending on how you measure humanity. For an hour, the guards heard nothing. No violence, no screams, no sounds at all. This was unusual enough that one guard checked through the door gap, expecting to find the gladiator asleep or the woman dead. Instead, he saw them sitting on opposite sides of the room, not speaking, not moving, just existing in the same terrible silence. At the 2-hour mark, something unprecedented happened. Gaius called for the guards and made a declaration that would echo all the way to the Senate floor. This woman is ill. I reject the allocation. Return her to general holding. It was the only loophole in the system. If a captive was deemed diseased, a gladiator could legally refuse her, and she'd be sent to the medical section instead of his chamber. The lie was obvious to everyone. The woman showed no signs of illness, but Roman bureaucracy ran on procedure, not truth. Challenging a gladiator's official statement required paperwork, witnesses, an inquiry. Accepting it required nothing but a signature. The woman was removed. Gaius returned to his quarters alone, and somewhere in the administrative depths of the arena, a scribe made a note in the daily log that would survive 2,000 years. Victor refused allocation, citing medical concern that should have been the end of it. A single gladiator, a single refusal, barely worth mentioning. Except 3 weeks later, Gaius won again. Again he refused his reward. Then a third time, then other gladiators started doing the same thing. Not many, but enough to notice. Enough that the arena masters had to convene a meeting. Enough that trainers started punishing fighters who showed softness. Enough that a senator's nephew, beaten for following Gaius's example, brought the matter to the Senate floor. On September 19, 79 AD, the Senate of Rome was forced to debate something they'd successfully ignored for 2 centuries, whether the systematic sexual exploitation of war captives as public entertainment had maybe, possibly, gone too far. The conservative faction, led by Senator Marcus Fabius, invoked tradition with religious fervor. Our ancestors conquered holy body, land, and spirit. This built our greatness. To question it now is to question Rome itself. He had a point, historically. Every major civilization of the ancient world treated conquered women as spoils. Rome had simply industrialized it, added administrative structure, built architectural support for it. The reformist faction, influenced by Stoic philosophy and practical politics, countered with a different concern. 3 provincial governors had sent reports warning that Rome's treatment of captive women was being used as recruitment propaganda by rebel groups. Dead enemies stay dead, but traumatized survivors go home with stories, and stories fuel uprisings for generations. The empire wasn't just being cruel, it was creating its own future enemies. The debate lasted for hours. Half the Senate refused to be recorded, their votes listed only as present. Abstaining. When the Lex Captiva Dignitas passed, it did so narrowly, with language so careful it barely meant anything. Female prisoners of noble or religious status could not be publicly allocated as arena rewards. Private exploitation continued, slavery continued. Rape, as a weapon of conquest, continued. The only thing that changed was visibility. Rome didn't develop a conscience, it developed better public relations. The woman Gaius had refused. She died 11 days after he sent her to medical holding, not from violence, not from execution, but from infection. The most common killer in Roman captivity, the medical quarters were overcrowded, filthy, and understaffed. She'd survived one form of Roman cruelty only to be consumed by another. History doesn't record her name. The bronze tag found near where she likely died was corroded, the stamped letters illegible except for Dacian. Gaius himself won his freedom 8 months later, not for mercy, but for winning 5 consecutive matches. His last documented act as a free man appears in a manumission record. He purchased and freed a Dacian woman named Zia, the priestess from the holding cells. We don't know why he chose her specifically. We don't know if she was the same woman from his first refusal or a different one. Roman records cared about property transfers, not emotions. What we do know is this: his single act of refusal saved one woman for a handful of days. One woman, briefly, in an empire that enslaved millions. The machinery kept running. The games continued. The underground chambers remained in use until the Colosseum itself fell into disrepair centuries later. Gaius's rebellion was a raindrop in an ocean of blood, noted, recorded, and ultimately irrelevant to the tide. The 2019 excavation report includes photographs the public rarely sees, close-ups of those scratch marks near the doorframes, patterns worn into stone by repeated use of chains. A child's toy, carved from wood, found wedged between floor stones, evidence that some captives had been held there long enough for normal human life to attempt continuation, even in hell. The archaeologists noted something else. Many of the chambers showed signs of regular cleaning. Fresh water channels maintained ventilation. This wasn't improvised cruelty. These rooms were part of the original architectural plans, designed with the same engineering precision as the lion lifts and gladiator tunnels. Rome built monuments that still stand. It also built this. Both are true. Both are Rome. The tragedy isn't merely that Rome was cruel. Every ancient empire was cruel. The tragedy is that Rome systematized it, made it efficient, turned it into entertainment, and convinced itself that tradition made it righteous. The line between civilization and barbarism has never been measured by aqueducts or roads or literature. It's measured by what you do to people who have no power to stop you. Gaius Valerius Maximus proved something Rome didn't want proven, that even inside the machine, individual choice still existed. That a man Rome had spent 14 years turning into a weapon could still remember he was human. That the system, perfect as it seemed, could fracture on the simple decision of one person to say no. It changed almost nothing. The woman still died. The games continued. But in an empire built on the absolute power of dominance, even one refusal mattered. Even one name recorded mattered. Even one law passed in shame and silence mattered, because it meant Rome, for just a moment, had to look at what it was doing and couldn't quite meet its own eyes. 2,000 years later, tourists walk through the Colosseum and marvel at Roman engineering. Children run across the arena floor where sand once soaked up blood. Guides talk about gladiators and emperors and the glory of ancient civilization. Almost no one mentions the rooms below. Almost no one asks what happened when the crowds went home. But the scratch marks are still there, preserved in limestone, made by hands that wanted desperately to leave some evidence that existed. The bronze tags are in museum storage now, cataloged and filed. And somewhere in the Vatican archives, a Senate document records a debate about whether maybe, possibly, Rome had discovered a limit to what tradition could justify. The woman whose name we'll never know died without knowing her death would matter. Caius made a choice without knowing it would reach the Senate. Rome passed a law without knowing archaeologists would one day dig up proof of why it was needed. None of them knew their story would travel 2,000 years into a future where we'd still be asking the same questions. What does power do to people? What does it take to stay human inside systems designed to make you cruel? And when does the cost of tradition finally outweigh its weight? The answer is still waiting in those rooms beneath the arena floor, written in stone by people Rome tried to erase. They couldn't scream loud enough to be heard over the crowds, but they scratched their presence into walls that would outlast the empire itself. And now, to millennia later, we can finally hear them. That's the real victory, not over Rome, but over silence.